Hello, welcome to my reflection on one of the passages set for this Sunday. This is from St John's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. John wrote this: When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cord, and he drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it up again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples record what he had said. Then they believed the scriptures and the words that Jesus had spoken. This is an interesting passage. It throws up a challenging scenario for us. When is it right to follow the law and when not to? And which law do we follow? Paul, in his letter to the Romans, chapter 6 verse 14, said that we are no longer bound by the law. And yet Jesus said, "I come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." That's in Matthew 5, chapters 17 to 20. So who was right? They are, of course, both correct. Jesus fulfilled the law, which required a sacrifice to be paid for a person's sins, by becoming the final sacrifice for all people for all time. Because he was perfect, only perfect animals without a blemish could be used in animal sacrifices. He was the only person suitable for the task. When Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, says Christians are dead to the law, that's in chapter 2 verse 19, he is saying that legally God looks at us as if we had died with Jesus, because our sins died with him on the cross, and so we are no longer condemned by them. Our Christian life begins when we accept Jesus into our lives. We, metaphorically speaking, die to our old way of life and embrace the new life in Jesus Christ. Our focus now becomes not on dying, but as living new creations. We are born again. Now I've heard it said that what Paul in his letter to the Colossians chapter 2 verse 14 says was nailed to the cross was the ceremonial law. People have broken the law into either 2, ceremonial and moral, or 3 parts, ceremonial, civil and moral, and argued that the ceremonial and civil laws no longer apply to us because we live in different times. There is now no temple and we live with different civil laws. The problem is the Bible doesn't break up the law as nice and neatly as that. In fact, it doesn't break the law up at all. Paul says in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3 verse 7, that the law, which leads to death, is no longer relevant in the believer's life. And it's the law which, as he says, was written and engraved on stones. The only laws written on stone were the moral laws, the Ten Commandments. So on the face of it, this is a pretty confusing situation. Are we under the law or not? If so, which bits of it? Let us step back a bit and look at the whole picture. Why and to whom was the law given? The law applies to those to whom it was given. Its purpose was to reveal sin without exception and to bring the world to recognise their need for God through the lives and experiences of the Israelites. But it cannot fix sin. Paul wrote about this in his letter to the Romans, chapter 3, verse 20. The sacrificial system was the temporary fix for sin. Further on in his letter to the Romans, chapter 7, verses 7 to 12, Paul says, the law is good, perfect and holy. But it cannot help you be good, perfect or holy. As Paul says in this passage, it showed him to be a sinner. So what is the law for? It is for people who do not believe in Jesus Christ, who he is, why he came to this earth, the fact that he died and was resurrected. It's not for believers, because Jesus fulfilled the need for the law. It's important we understand this fact. Those who insist on following the law put themselves back under its curse. Again, Paul in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verse 4 says, for if you are trying to make yourself right with God by keeping the law, you have cut yourself off from Christ. You have fallen away from God's grace. The law was to lead people to God by putting them under the awareness of both its severity and their inability to fulfill it. That is why we need Jesus as our sacrifice to be freed from it. The law always was more of a curse than a blessing to those who were under it. That was its very purpose, to show just how much trouble they were in. Jesus came to set us free from this curse and fulfill what was recorded in Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 33 and reiterated in Hebrews chapter 10 verse 16, when God said, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. It is so important to understand that the law is good, it is perfect, it is holy, as we've seen in Romans. But most importantly, it's essential that we remember that it has a purpose. That purpose is to lead people to recognise their weakness in being good. It is there to push people towards God until they give up on the law and choose to rely on God's gift of grace. The law will never save anyone, nor will it make them a better person, whether they are a believer or an unbeliever. It is simply there to show us how lost we are without grace. The truth is, we have been set free from the law, and our lives in grace will look better than those of any person trying to keep the law. Because we are not cleansed from the outside, we are cleaned from the inside. Hence Jesus' reference to white-walled tombs. We have become a new creation. So what about the laws of today? Are we bound by them? Sadly, we are, for the very reason Paul says in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 5, when he says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. So we may not like the government of the day or what the church hierarchy says should happen, but we are obliged to follow, and if need be, to change a corrupt system from the inside. Thank you.